The engagement announcement. A Wall Street story. It was one of those crisp October evenings in Lower Manhattan when the city seemed to hum with possibility. The financial district had settled into its after-hours rhythm, the frantic energy of trading day giving way to the more relaxed atmosphere of unwinding professionals. That's when Marcus Chun gathered 5 of us from Sterling and Associates Investment Group for what he called a celebration drink at Murphy's Tavern on Stone Street. Murphy's was our usual haunt, a dimly lit establishment that had been serving Wall Street workers since the 1920s. The wooden booths were scarred with decades of deals discussed and careers debated. The amber lighting cast everything in warm tones, and the constant murmur of conversation provided the perfect backdrop for the kind of shop talk that defined our after-work gatherings. Our group that evening consisted of Marcus, of course, our organizer, a senior analyst with an infectious smile and an uncanny ability to read market trends. There was Sarah Martinez, our derivatives specialist, sharp as a tack with numbers, but even sharper with her observations about office politics. Jake Thompson sat across from me, a junior associate who'd joined us 6 months ago from Harvard Business School, still eager to prove himself. Next to him was David Kim, our portfolio manager, quiet but observant, the type who listened more than he spoke, but always had something valuable to add when he did. And then there was Rebecca Foster, our compliance officer, who somehow managed to make even the most mundane regulatory discussion sound interesting. And me? I'm Alex Rivera, Senior Vice President of Client Relations, 15 years deep in the world of high-stakes finance, and apparently terrible at reading social situations, as you'll soon discover. Marcus had been unusually animated all afternoon, practically bouncing in his chair during our 4 p.m. market wrap-up meeting. He kept checking his phone, which wasn't like him. Marcus was usually laser-focused during business hours. When he suggested drinks, there was something different in his voice, an excitement that went beyond the usual "we survived another trading day" relief. We claimed our regular booth in the back corner, the one with the slightly wobbly table that Jake always tried to stabilize with folded napkins. The waitress, Jenny, knew her usual orders by heart. Marcus always started with a craft IPA, Sarah preferred her whiskey neat, Jake stuck to imported beer, David ordered wine, Rebecca went for cocktails, and I was a bourbon person through and through. "All right, everyone," Marcus announced, raising his glass before we'd even had a chance to settle in properly. "I've got some news to share, and I wanted to celebrate it with the people I spend most of my waking hours with." He paused, grinning widely. "But first, let's get the usual workplace therapy session out of the way. I know you all have stories from today." That's when I made what would become known as the biggest social blunder of my Wall Street career. You see, I'd had a particularly frustrating day dealing with one of our back office coordinators, and I was eager to vent. The alcohol hadn't even hit my system yet, but the promise of a sympathetic audience was intoxicating enough. "Oh, don't get me started," I said, leaning forward with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been saving up grievances all day. "I've got the perfect example of workplace incompetence for you all. Angela Martinez." Sarah immediately perked up. "Angela from operations? The one who handles the trade confirmations?" "That's the one," I confirmed, taking a sip of my bourbon. "I swear, that woman is single-handedly trying to sabotage our client relationships. This morning, I had a meeting with the Whitmore Foundation, our biggest nonprofit client, and I needed the quarterly performance reports that were supposed to be ready by Monday. I was really getting into my stride now, gesturing with my glass. Not only were the reports 2 days late, but when I finally got them, half the data was wrong. The benchmark comparisons were using last quarter's figures. 3 client names were misspelled, including Whitmore itself, which she somehow turned into Whitman, and don't even get me started on the formatting. It looked like it had been put together by someone who'd never seen a professional document in their life. Jake jumped in with his own story. "Oh man, I know exactly what you're talking about. Last week, she sent me the wrong acquisition documents for the Peterson merger. I spent 3 hours reviewing paperwork for a completely different deal before I realized what happened. When I called her about it, she actually had the nerve to suggest that maybe I should have been more careful reading the headers." "The headers?" I exclaimed. Don't you love how she always manages to make her mistakes sound like they're somehow her fault? And the attitude she gives you when you ask for corrections. It's like she's doing you a personal favor by doing her actual job. Rebecca chimed in with her experiences. I've had my own run-ins with her. The compliance reports she submits are consistently late, and when I ask for clarification on certain entries, she acts like I'm questioning her competence rather than just trying to make sure we're meeting regulatory requirements. Last month, she submitted a report with client data that was so obviously wrong that I had to spend an entire weekend cross-referencing everything to make sure we weren't about to get hit with a violation. David, who rarely criticized anyone, even nodded in agreement. I've noticed issues with the portfolio updates she handles. Numbers that don't add up, missing footnotes, inconsistent formatting between reports. It makes our whole department look unprofessional when we're presenting to potential clients. Sarah was particularly animated, and she's always got an excuse. It's either the system was down, or she didn't get the information in time, or someone else was supposed to handle that part. Never just a simple, I made a mistake, I'll fix it. It's exhausting dealing with someone who can't take responsibility for their own work. I was feeling validated by all the agreement around the table. Exactly. And the thing is, it's not just about the work quality, though that's bad enough. It's the attitude. She's dismissive. She interrupts you when you're trying to explain what needs to be corrected, and she has this way of making you feel like you're being unreasonable for expecting basic professional standards. I honestly don't understand how she's managed to keep her job this long. I continued, really getting worked up now. In any other industry, with that level of consistent poor performance and unprofessional behavior, she would have been let go months ago. We're supposed to be a top-tier investment firm, and we've got people like Angela Martinez representing us to our clients. It's embarrassing. That's when I noticed that Marcus had gone very quiet. The smile had faded from his face, and he was staring down at his beer with an expression I couldn't quite read. The rest of the table was still energized from our collective venting session, but something in Marcus's demeanor made me pause. "Marcus," Sarah asked, noticing the same thing I had. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus cleared his throat softly, and when he looked up, there was a mixture of embarrassment and something else, pride, maybe, in his eyes. "Well," he said, his voice carefully measured, "this is awkward timing, but I guess there's no way around it now." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, setting it gently on the wobbly table. "The news I want to share with you all, the reason I wanted to celebrate tonight, is that I proposed to my girlfriend last weekend." She said yes. The table fell silent. You could hear the conversations from other booths, the clink of glasses at the bar, the distant sound of traffic on Stone Street. But our little corner of Murphy's Tavern had become a pocket of stunned quiet. "Her name," Marcus continued, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of something, hurt, disappointment, "is Angela Martinez." I felt my stomach drop to somewhere around my shoes. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Shakespeare stopped halfway to his lips and just hung there in midair. Rebecca's face went pale, and David closed his eyes as if he could somehow undo the last 15 minutes by sheer force of will. The Angela Martinez we'd been systematically destroying with our complaints, the woman whose work ethic, professionalism, and basic competence we'd been questioning. She was Marcus's fiancée, the woman he just asked to marry him, the woman he was sitting here, proudly wanting to celebrate with his closest work colleagues. We've been dating for about 8 months. Marcus continued, either not noticing or choosing to ignore our collective horror. I know I kept it quiet. You all know how the office gets with workplace relationships, even when they're between different departments. But she's amazing. Smart, funny, incredibly hardworking. She puts in more hours than most of us, trying to juggle multiple department requests with impossible deadlines. He took another sip of his beer, and I could see him gathering his thoughts. The thing is, Angela's been dealing with some really difficult circumstances at work lately. She's been handling the workload of what should be 2 people ever since her department got restructured last quarter. Management decided they could cut costs by eliminating one position and just redistributing the work. She's been staying late almost every night, coming in early, working weekends, try to keep up with demand from 5 different departments, all with different standards and expectations. And instead of getting support or understanding, she's been getting criticized for not meeting impossible standards. I watched Marcus's face as he spoke, and I could see the protectiveness there, the love, but also the hurt. She comes home exhausted most nights, stressed about work, worried that she's not doing a good enough job, that people think she's incompetent. I keep telling her that she's doing the work of 2 people and that anyone would struggle with that workload. The night I proposed, Marcus continued. She was working late again, trying to finish a batch of reports that had been requested by 3 different departments, all with different formatting requirements, all needed by the next morning. I showed up at her apartment at 9 p.m. with takeout Chinese food and found her surrounded by paperwork, stressed out of her mind. That's when I realized I couldn't wait for the perfect moment I'd been planning. She was there, working herself to exhaustion, trying to meet everyone's expectations, and I knew I wanted to spend my life with someone who cared that much about doing right by people, even when those people weren't necessarily doing right by her. The silence at our table was deafening. Every complaint we just made was being recontextualized in real time. The late reports we'd criticized, she was juggling 5 times the normal workload. The formatting inconsistencies, she was trying to meet different standards from different departments simultaneously. The attitude we'd perceived as dismissive, she was probably defensive from being constantly criticized for circumstances beyond her control. Marcus, I finally managed to say, wouldn't know. About the relationship, about the workload situation. If we had known, Marcus held up a hand, stopping me. I'm not angry with you all. I understand that you were just sharing your work experiences. And I know Angela hasn't been perfect. She's been under a lot of stress, and stress can make anyone shorter-tempered than usual. But I wanted you to know the context. The thing is, he continued, Angela is one of the most dedicated people I've ever met. She cares about this company, about the work, about doing right by the clients. She's just been put in an impossible situation, and instead of getting support, she's been getting blamed for the inevitable results of that situation. Jake was the first to speak up. Marcus, I owe you, and Angela, an apology. I should have been more understanding about the workload issues. When I got those wrong merger documents, I should have approached it differently. Rebecca nodded vigorously. I've been so focused on compliance deadlines that I didn't consider what kind of pressure she might be under from other departments. I could have been more collaborative instead of just critical. Sarah looked genuinely remorseful. I think I've been part of the problem. I've been treating her like she's just bad at her job, when really, she's been drowning in work and trying to keep her head above water. David, ever the thoughtful one, leaned forward. This is a good reminder that we don't always see the full picture of what our colleagues are dealing with. We see the end results that affect us, but we don't always see the circumstances that created those results. And me? I was sitting there realizing that I'd been the most vocal critic of the woman my friend and colleague had just proposed to. The woman he was clearly head over heels in love with. The woman whose work struggles were apparently the result of systematic understaffing rather than personal incompetence. Marcus, I said, I need to apologize, not just to you but to Angela. I've been unfair, and I've been part of creating a hostile work environment for someone who is already dealing with more than her share of challenges. That's not okay. Marcus smiled then, the first genuine smile we'd seen from him since the conversation took its unfortunate turn. I appreciate that, Alex. And honestly, I think it would mean a lot to Angela if you told her that directly. She's been feeling pretty isolated at work lately. He raised his beer glass again. So, can we try this again? I'd like to toast to Angela Martinez, my fiancée, and to the hope that her work experience improves now that you all understand the situation better. We all raised our glasses, and this time the toast felt very different. Instead of celebrating while harboring negative feelings about his partner, we were celebrating while committing to being better colleagues to her. So tell us about the proposal, Sarah said, clearly eager to move the conversation to happier territory. And have you started thinking about wedding plans? Marcus's whole demeanor changed, his face lighting up with the enthusiasm he'd had when he first gathered us together. Well, like I said, it wasn't the elaborate plan I'd originally had in mind. I've been thinking about this elaborate dinner, maybe a weekend getaway, something really special. But that night, seeing her there working so hard, caring so much about doing right by everyone, I got down on one knee right there in her living room, surrounded by financial reports and compliance documents. I told her that I loved her dedication, her work ethic, her kindness, even her stubbornness. I told her I wanted to build a life with someone who cared as much as she did about everything she did. She started crying immediately. Marcus continued, grinning at the memory. But then she said yes, and then she said, "But I have to finish these reports first." That's when I knew I was marrying the right person. As for wedding plans, we're thinking next fall. Something small, probably here in the city. Angela wants to wait until after the restructuring at work is complete and things settle down a bit. She doesn't want to be planning a wedding while she's still trying to prove herself in what feels like a new job. Of course, you're all invited, Marcus added, assuming you can manage not to insult the bride at the reception. That broke the tension, and we all laughed, some of us more nervously than others. But it was a good laugh, the kind that acknowledges a mistake and moves forward from it. In all seriousness, I said, I think we need to have a conversation with management about the workload situation in Angela's department. If she's really handling the work of 2 people, that's not sustainable for anyone. Rebecca nodded. From a compliance perspective, having one person juggling that many different requirements is actually a risk factor. If something falls through the cracks because of overwork, we could all be in trouble. Why don't we set up a meeting next week? David suggested. We could present it as a workflow efficiency issue rather than making it about Angela specifically. Show management how the current structure is creating bottlenecks and potential quality issues. That would be amazing, Marcus said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. Angela would never ask for that kind of support herself. She's too proud and too worried about seeming like she can't handle the job. But if it comes from you all as a general efficiency concern. We spent the rest of the evening talking about happier things. Marcus and Angela's relationship, carefully avoiding any more work-related commentary, wedding planning, and eventually moving on to other topics entirely. But the conversation had fundamentally changed something about our group dynamic. As we prepared to leave Murphy's Tavern that night, I found myself thinking about how easy it is to make assumptions about people based on limited information. We'd seen Angela's work output and made judgments about her competence, her attitude, her professionalism, without understanding the context of her situation. More than that, we created an echo chamber where our negative opinions reinforced each other, where each person's complaint validated everyone else's frustrations. We turned a colleague's struggle into a source of bonding over shared grievances. As I walked home through the quiet streets of Lower Manhattan, past the darkened windows of investment firms and law offices, I thought about how many other Angela Martinez's might be out there. Colleagues whose struggles we don't see, whose efforts we don't recognize, whose challenges we don't understand. The next morning, I made a point of stopping by Angela's desk before diving into my own work. I found her there at 7 a.m., already working through a stack of documents that looked like it could keep someone busy for a week. Angela, I said, do you have a minute? I wanted to talk to you about some of the projects we've been working on together. She looked up with that guarded expression I'd come to recognize, the one that said she was bracing herself for another complaint, another criticism, another impossible request. Actually, I said, I wanted to apologize. I've been unfair to you, and I've been part of making your job harder than it needs to be. I didn't understand the scope of what you were dealing with, and instead of being supportive, I was just adding to the pressure. The wariness in her expression gradually gave way to surprise, then something that might have been relief. Thank you for saying that. It's been a really challenging few months. I can imagine. And I want you to know that several of us are going to be talking to management about the workload distribution in your department. Not as a complaint about you, but as a structural issue that needs to be addressed. She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from her. That would be really helpful. I've been feeling like I'm constantly letting people down, no matter how hard I try. Oh, and congratulations on your engagement, I added. Marcus is a lucky guy. Her face lit up in a way that transformed her completely. Thank you. I'm still getting used to the idea myself. He's been incredibly supportive through all of this work stress. I don't know what I would have done without him. Over the following weeks, our group did indeed meet with management about the workload issues. The conversation was easier than expected. Apparently, several other departments have been noticing quality and timing issues that they've been attributing to various causes. When we presented it as a systemic problem rather than individual failures, management was receptive to solutions. Angela's department was restructured again, this time with additional support staff and clearer workflow processes. The improvement in both quality and timeliness was immediate and noticeable. More importantly, the improvement in Angela's workplace experience was evident to anyone who interacted with her. Marcus and Angela's wedding the following October was a beautiful affair in a small venue in Brooklyn Heights with views of the Manhattan skyline. Angela looked radiant, and Marcus couldn't stop smiling. During his speech, he mentioned how grateful he was to work with people who cared enough about each other to admit when they were wrong and work to make things better. As I sat there at the reception, watching my colleague dance with his new wife, I thought about that evening at Murphy's Tavern and how a single moment of awkward revelation had changed all of our perspectives. It reminded me that behind every professional interaction is a human being with their own challenges, their own struggles, their own story that we might not see. The lesson I took away from that experience wasn't just about being more careful with workplace gossip, though that's certainly part of it. It was about the importance of curiosity over judgment, about asking what might be going on here, instead of assuming this person is just bad at their job. Wall Street is a place where quick judgments and competitive attitudes often rule the day. But that night at Murphy's Tavern taught me that even in the most competitive environments, there's always room for compassion, understanding, and the willingness to admit when we've got it wrong.